if we see again the steps, step 1, we have to find out the reasonable expected rent of the property. Step 2, find out the rent actually received or receivable. From here we will deduct the unrealized rent, but it is before deducting the loss due to vacancy. Step 3, find out which one is higher. Step 4, find out the loss due to vacancy. And step 5 is step 3 minus step 4, and which will actually give us the gross annual value. Let us take one example where the municipal valuation, the fair rent, the standard rent, the actual rent received or receivable, unrealized rent, period of months in that particular period, it is taken as 12 months for each cases, and loss due to vacancy are given for 5 house property, namely A, B, C, D, E. So in this example we have taken loss due to vacancy as well as unrealized rent. Now our purpose is to see how the gross annual value is calculated when there are standard rent is present, unrealized rent is there, and also there is a vacancy allowance. So if we see that how it is being determined, in step 1 we will find out the expected rent, which is the higher of municipal valuation and fair rent, which shows like this for 5 house properties A, B, C, D, E. Step 2, we will see rent received after deducting the unrealized rent. So we will deduct the unrealized rent from the actual rent received, and these are the figures. Step 3, higher of step 1 and step 2, and accordingly in case of house A it is 1,08,000, house B 1,10,000, house C 89,000, house D 1,12,000, house E 1,08,000. Step 4, we have to see loss due to vacancy. In first house there is no loss, second house 2,000, third house 3,000, fourth house 4,000, and fifth house there is no loss in vacancy. So GAV, the gross annual value, is step 3 minus step 4. So in case of house 1 we see it 1,08,000, house B it is 1,08,000, house C it is 86,000, house D 1,08,000, and house E 1,08,000. So this example should clear the concept of expected rent, the rent received after deduction of unrealized rent, and also the treatment of loss due to vacancy. Second condition, where let out property is vacant for part of the year. That is, where let out property is vacant for part of the year owing to the vacancy, the actual rent is lower than the expected rent, then the actual rent received or receivable is the gross annual value. But the expected rent and receivable, received or receivable is lower than the year because of the vacancy, then only expected actual rent received or receivable will be the GAV. In other cases, if the actual rent received or receivable is more, in that case it will be taken as the GAV. In case of self-occupied property or unoccupied property, now what is unoccupied property? The expression unoccupied property refers to a property which cannot be occupied by the owner by reason of his employment or business or profession at a different place, and he resides in such other place as in a building not belonging to him. In that case the house property will be taken as unoccupied property. Now where the property is self-occupied for own residence or unoccupied throughout the previous year, the annual value will be taken as nil, provided no other benefit is derived by the owner from such property. The benefit of exemption of one self-occupied house is available only to individual or HUF. And now this will be 2 self-occupied house from assessment year 2020-21, and no deduction for municipal taxes is allowed in respect of such property whose annual value is taken as nil. Now, where a house property is let out for part of the year and self-occupied for part of the year, that is, if a single unit of a property is self-occupied for part of the year and let out for the remaining part of the year, then the expected rent for the whole year shall be taken into account for determining the gross annual value. The expected rent of the whole year shall be compared with the actual rent for the let out period, and whichever is higher shall be taken as gross annual value. However, the municipal tax for the whole year is allowed to be deducted provided it is paid by the owner during the previous year. In case of deemed to be let out property, it is given under section 23 subsection 4 that where the assessee owns more than one property or two property as the case may be from assessment year 2021 for self occupation, then the income of any such property at the option of the assessee shall be computed self occupied property and the annual value will be taken as nil. The other self occupied or unoccupied properties shall be treated as deemed to be let out properties. The option can be changed year after year in a manner which is beneficial to the assessee. In case of a house property which is held as stock in trade, section 23 subsection 5 deals with this, that in some cases property consisting of any building or land appurtenant thereto may be held as stock in trade, and the whole or any part of the property may not be let out during the whole or any part of the previous year. In such cases, the annual value of such property or part of the property shall be taken as nil. The benefit would be available for the period up to 1 year from the end of the financial year in which certificate of completion of construction of the property is obtained from the competent authority. This is the case of property held as stock in trade. In case of house property, a portion is let out and portion is self occupied. Income from any portion of a property which is let out shall be computed separately under the let out property category, and the portion of or part which is self occupied shall be computed under the self occupied category. There is no need to treat the whole property as a single unit for computation of income from house property. Municipal valuation, fair rent, standard rent, if not given separately, shall be apportioned between the let out portion and self occupied portion either on plinth area or built up space or on such other reasonable basis. Property taxes or municipal taxes, if given on a consolidated basis, can be bifurcated as attributed to each portion or floor or a reasonable basis. In many cases, the discussions which we have carried out so far, the income is taken as a notional income instead of real income. Thus, under this head of income, there are circumstances where notional income is charged to tax instead of real income. For example, the assessee owns more than one house property, where one house property or two house property as the case may be will be taken as self occupied and the gross annual value will be taken as nil. Other house properties will be taken as deemed to be let out and their gross annual value will be charged separately as the expected rent, where the expected rent is the notional income. As in the case of let out property also, if the expected rent exceeds the actual rent, then the expected rent is the GAV, and expected rent is of course notional. In case of a house property as a stock held as a stock in trade, so the income has to be computed on notional basis by taking the expected rent as the GAV after 1 year from the financial year in which certificate of completion of construction of the property is given.